Usual housekeeping notes. So the meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the council website within 24 hours of the meeting. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, allowing remote participants to join. Would all remote participants please use their hand up icon to indicate if they have a question? In-person attendees are required to wear masks on entry to the building and meeting room, but may remove them when seated. Would members and officers please remember to switch their microphone on when speaking and off when they have finished speaking in the council chamber, and ensure the microphone is positioned near you and speak directly into the microphone. Please can remote participants switch their microphones and cameras on when speaking and off when finished. Would in-person attendees please switch off mobile phones or put them on silent mode? If you need to take the call, please leave the room. Okay, so with that being completed, we'll move on to the agenda. So first item is apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Keynes, Councillor Moles, Katie Thompson, the primary school representative, and Joe Miles, the secondary school representative.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is the minutes, which have been circulated or included in the document pack. Have there been any comments, or are there any comments in the room on the minutes? No, so those minutes are confirmed. Yeah, great. Cool, so those are confirmed. Thank you. Moving on to the next item in the agenda, which is disclosures of interest. Okay, I can see no hands up and there have been no advanced disclosures of interest. Okay, good. Oh, sorry, Dr. Mohammed. I didn't see your hand up there. Go ahead, Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. Just I'm a school governor at Warden Hill Infant, Rathmere Nursery, and Meath Primary. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is urgent business. I have no urgent business, nothing's been raised. So we'll move on to the next item, which is references from committees and other bodies.
None, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And the Chair's update to report issues since the last meeting. Again, I have nothing to cover under this agenda of the item. So moving on to the main agenda items. We have representatives here, external representatives to cover item 8. So we'll perhaps go straight to item 8, which is the Pan Bedfordshire Family Drug and Alcohol Court item. And if I may, actually, just if officers could perhaps keep their presentations brief, if at all possible, and we'll move on to questions and comments as soon as we can. Thank you. So yeah, item 8.
Hi.
Chair, Beverly, can I just come in, because I just think it would be really helpful to introduce you both. So just to advise our committee that we've got Judge Patrick Perusco and our team manager for our Family Drug and Alcohol Court, who we're delighted to welcome tonight. We've got a Pan Bedfordshire Family Drug and Alcohol Court that Judge Patrick Perusco, with other senior leaders, championed and led the way on in terms of development. And we're really pleased to be able to provide Scrutiny with an overview of the report, an overview of the work, and then the independent evaluation that was undertaken by Research in Practice. So we're at a kind of key pivotal point, really, in terms of the investment that all partners have made on a Pan Bedfordshire footprint. and looking to progress politically and financially, the sort of corporate commitment to long-term funding based upon outcomes and impact for our children and young people. So a very warm welcome and thank you, Judge Kurusco and Beverly, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Everybody's got before them the FDAC presentation and the Research and Practice Evaluation Report, and I don't propose to dwell on that because I know you'll have had an opportunity to consider it. What I just want to do is raise a few pointers, and then we have a parent who is far more able to speak about FDAC than I have, and we have a video to share with you. And then I'm going to hand over quite quickly to Judge Perushko to talk about FDAC. So I just wanted to explain to those who haven't heard of FDAC before, it's to address parental substance misuse, because where there is parental substance misuse, there's a risk that can result in care proceedings being initiated, and often that can include removal of children from parental care. And for those children that do come out of parental care where there is parental substance misuse, they can struggle to address their difficulties, and those children often end up not returning to their families, and they can end up spending a majority of their childhood in foster care. So this is what we're seeking to address, and FDAC is an alternative, more successful form of care proceedings where there is substance misuse by parents. We're trauma informed and bespoke. We work on a problem-solving basis for each parent, and I think the key point is we recognise for each person who's using substances and trying to parent that they've arrived at that point because more often than not of trauma, and it's a survival strategy they've developed to survive that, but it holds risk for their children, which is why it needs to be addressed. So the partnership, just to clarify, PAMBED's partnership is children's services from each of the Bedfordshire local authorities and public health within those local authorities. It's the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, Clinical Commissioning Group, and a private charity too. So this partnership enables wraparound support, and what I'm going to do is share with you a video of a parent who was able to do that. Support, bear with me 1 second as I do this. This is where I very much hope this works. Can I just check that everybody's able to see the video?
Hello, I'm Nicola.
Yep.
So, what do I think for FDAC? Honestly, not really words to kind of do it justice, but I like words, so I'll give it a go. So, I've been an addict my entire life, pretty much. Addicted to substance since my teens. And I kind of resigned myself to the fact that that was who I was always going to be. And, you know, heart just kind of fudged my way through life and couldn't look after my children, could barely look after myself. And I had 2 sons, my mum was raising them. When I had my 3rd child, unexpectedly, we ended up in court proceedings again, and this FDAC proposal was put to me. I was like, oh, okay, why not? Give it a go. So I was motivated. I didn't really know how I was going to find recovery. I honestly didn't really believe that I could, but I was motivated to give it a go. I wanted it. So the first thing FDAC said to me was, what can we do to help you? I was like, okay. And we believe you can do this. We're going to help you do it. Oh, okay. This was new. I'm not sure what their game is, but yeah, let's give it a go. And so I embarked on a very intensive FDAC proceedings. And quite honestly, it gave me a life. It didn't give me my old life back, because I never had one to speak of, but it's given me a new life. Practically, helped me get my home, had my children all living with me, kept the baby. I was introduced to recovery services. I now volunteer for one of those recovery services, helping other people. Even got a view to this week, literally just talking about going into full-time employment. Like, that's a career. I'm going to have a career. This is mad. Never done a real proper leave for days work in my life, kind of, yeah, I did that too. So, yeah, they gave me that drug service introduced me to a fellowship. So I've got a little community. I've got friends. I never had friends. Like, I had people that I got high with. Never had friends. I have a community of people, healthy people. I did healthy relationships work. So I now recognise what's healthy and what's not. I recognise that the old relationships weren't healthy at all. They weren't normal like I thought they were. And I can form friendships, and I know kind of, I know what's right and wrong. I know what's okay, friendship, relationship, the whole thing. Mindfulness work, I've done lots of mindfulness work, seeing my part in things, and I was always very reactive. Now I'm proactive, so now I think through what I'm doing and I do things for the right reasons. I overanalyse everything, but I analyse things in a healthy way, and I see my part in things, and I've learned all that from my key worker, from the healthy relationships counsellor, and then doing the counselling around trauma and my self-worth. I had no self-esteem and no confidence. Didn't really think much of myself, to be fair. And I've learned that I've learned that I can be confident, and I do have worth. I am enough, and I do have something to offer. And it wasn't always easy. There was bumps along the road, and it was tiring, and it was intense, and it was very raw. But the key thing that, aside from all the practical stuff, and the mental stuff, that the therapist, I did CBT, that was invaluable. Aside from all that, and the house and things like that, the key thing I got from FDAC was they believed in me, and no one had ever believed in me. And when, at the very beginning, when my confidence was at rock bottom and I had no self-esteem and I didn't really believe I could do it, that was okay, because they believed in me. My team believed in me, my FDAC team, the court-appointed guardian, my social worker, judge, great judge. They all believed in me, and they popped me, and they supported me, and they held me up, and I believed in myself. And then when I finally did believe in myself, and I finally did get that confidence growing, and my self-esteem did start to grow, they celebrated with me and kind of told me all the way along that, yeah, we know you can do this. And they'll say, and I know what they'll say because I've heard it a million times, but we didn't do all the work. You did all the work. And I did do that, and I recognise that. I couldn't have done it without their support, their guidance, their nurturing, their advice, and their belief in me. That was the key thing. That was what really, really, my opinion mattered. What I wanted mattered, and my ideas mattered. And if something wasn't going right, it could be adapted to work for me. That was, things. It was all done with me at the centre. I've never had that before, ever. And yeah, so I'm in a position now where I can see and help other people on their journey, and I can see them starting on their journey and becoming, the people that they should be, that they can be, and that is a beautiful thing. And I would never have been able to do that without FDAC. See my children grow up, and as a knock-on of kind of me stabilising and growing and becoming a productive, functioning person, my children have done the same. So they're doing well in school. We have a good relationship at home, and they're successful in the things that they try. And that wasn't happening before, and I can only assume that was as a knock-on of of my actions and choices that were reflecting on them. And they do, and I don't get the whole, I don't want to go to school today. That doesn't happen anymore. yeah, they're doing very, very well, and we're functioning as a successful family. And you know, it's a long road. Recovery is lifelong. It's challenging. Oh my god, it's so challenging. Like, you kind of think you go into recovery and it's just going to be wonderful. It's tough. It's tiring, but I have tools. I have strategies. I have ways to deal with general traumas and general stress and emotions. Oh my god, emotions are tough, but I know how to cope with them now, and I didn't know that before. I can do all that, and that's thanks to the key work sessions and the counselling and the relationship work that I did with FDAC. So yeah, FDAC gave me a life. It didn't give me an old one back, because the old one wasn't worth having. It's given me a new one, and it's given me a new career. It's given me a community. It's given me a network. It's given me my recovery and my family back. And yeah, so I do kind of owe my life to FDAC, and I'm very, very grateful for FDAC. It's done for me every single day. Still goes in my gratitude list every day. And yeah, now I'm in a position to help others. I'm looking forward to working with some of the FDAC team going forward and supporting new parents in recovery. It's challenging being a parent in recovery, doing life. It's hard, and to have a group of people, professional people that care, that believe in us, that's the main thing. So yeah, in a nutshell, what did FDAC do for me? It gave me my life. They believed in me. That's what's important. They believed in me, and they cared enough to want to keep me and my children together and to give us the life that we now have now. So yeah, God, I think that's it. There's probably so much more there is.
Stop screen sharing, and I just wanted to say before I hand over, Nikki's one of the 64% of parents in the FDAC pilot who achieve reunification of their children, and Judge Prushko, I'm sure, will talk about the comparative figures. And alongside that, there's prolonged abstinence. The evaluation identified 65% were maintaining abstinence by the end of care proceedings. There's recognition that parents saw their own difficulties and their child's difficulties and responded to them within FDAC, and also improved emotional and mental well-being, and that was found to be regardless of what the eventual outcome was of FDAC. And we've seen that with parents who've gone on to have improvements beyond care proceedings, even if it wasn't the ultimately reunification they desired. So I'm going to pass over to Judge Prushko and let him speak about FDAC.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this scrutiny committee. I'm really grateful to you for the opportunity to have a few words about FDAC, and also to thank Luton Borough for their commitment initially to funding this pilot, including the independent evaluation, and for their continued commitment to, I hope, continue to share funding moving forward on a permanent basis. Look, you've just heard from Nikki. I can't tell the FDAC story better than a parent who has been through it. Nikki lost her first two children to the system, as it were, because she'd failed to address her substance abuse. You've heard she was an addict still is an addict, of course, 22 years, but has now maintained abstinence for, well, it'll be well over 2 years, and she now works as a parent mentor for us within FDAC. We have in Pan Bedfordshire an example of not just fantastic co-working across 3 local authorities. It's not just about children's services. This is co-working across public health as well. We have funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner as well. So this is multidisciplinary public sector funding coming together to provide a service which produces fantastic outcomes. I mean, this is a really good news story in the area of child protection and family justice, and really at the cutting edge of family justice, and we need to be very proud of what we've achieved locally, because I'm sure, I know, that we have the best FDAC in the country. There are 15 FDACs covering about 25% of the country. We assist other areas now in trying to establish FDACs in their areas, because we're recognised as being a fantastic team headed by Beverly, of course, and the specialist team around her. A couple of things I'd like you to think about and take away, I hope, headline points really. In normal standard care proceedings, and I should say that I've worked in this area throughout my professional life, 35 years. I used to be a solicitor, been a judge for 14 years. And I've always worked in the field of child protection, sometimes for local authorities, actually. This is the one area of child protection that is the best area that I've ever worked in. It's the bit that gives us hope, because what we see in other areas of the court process, the family justice process, is that we achieve really very poor results, very poor outcomes for children and for families. Why do I say that? Well, in only 19% of those cases that come into court, I'm talking about standard care proceedings, non-FDAC cases, only 19% of cases do we see children reunified with their parents back in family units. That's dreadful. That means that in 81% of cases, we don't achieve what the aim is. And the aim is always to try, should be, to try and keep children within families. The reason being is that children need to be, they deserve to be in families. That's where they thrive, hopefully. Now, obviously, we need to remove children from families in some cases where their safety demands that permanently. But in 81%, children remain permanently away from their families. In FDAC, the outcomes are significantly improved. Nationally in FDAC, outcomes are about 44%. So in 44% as opposed to 19%, children go back home. In our FDAC, Bedfordshire, and I almost hesitate to emphasise this because I can't quite believe it myself, but 64, I think 63%, 64% rate of reunification in those first 2 years. Now, a word of caution. When we're talking again, I hope in 12 months' time, it won't be 63 or 64%. Of course it won't. It's a 2-year cohort of parents, and we've already seen in this 3rd year that we're now in, more challenges. It'll probably even out at about 45, perhaps 50%. But that's a significantly improved outcome than in standard proceedings. And equally importantly, research shows that parental abstinence from substances long-term is achieved where parents have been through FDAC as opposed to standard proceedings. So, and the other thing to bear in mind is that we're only getting within FDAC those cases which are brought to court by you, by local authorities. You're working with these families over many years often to try and achieve abstinence and achieve safety for children. We see the more difficult ones which come into court. And the reason why FDAC works in the court process better than standard care proceedings is that it's an entirely different model. It's what we call a problem-solving model, as opposed to an adversarial model where the local authority brings a case, has to prove its case, and parents always deny everything, and a judge at the end of the proceedings has to, more often than not, hear evidence, oral evidence over many days at great expense to the public purse. Everybody gets legal aid, and has to decide at the end of the case what happens to the child. In 81% of those cases, the child doesn't go back to the parents, and so the judge has to explain to the parents why they are bad parents, not good enough parents. So just think about the emotional effect on parents of that process. In FDAC, where we don't achieve reunification, where the outcome is not what the parent wants, we don't have contested court proceedings. Why? Because we wrap around support around a parent and we deal with it in a very empathetic way. They are engaged with in a far more hands-on way by the team, and they themselves know that they've been given the best chance to succeed. And if they don't succeed, they tell you they don't succeed. And the other point I wanted to emphasize before I stop, because my time is short with you, is the cost savings. Really important, obviously, for you in times of cuts year on year. You've got to be satisfied you're spending your money well. We get that. We understand that. FDAC saves money, big money for you. And you'll see from that long paper that's attached to your papers, which is the Research in Practice evaluation, that really significant money has been saved for you within FDAC. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is we don't have expensive contested court hearings. We don't have external experts, which you pay for. And of course, we achieve a much better rate of reunification, which saves significantly on care costs if children are going into foster care, which is very expensive. And there are some other savings as well. For example, if we avoid criminality, which is obviously associated with drug misuse, that's one of the reasons why the Police and Crime Commission is interested, as well as domestic abuse. So this works. And it's why I feel so passionately about it. It works well. We should be really proud. You should be really proud of your part in achieving, great success. Only 2.5 years in now, and I hope my vision is that we expand this model. This model works. We need to think about, in time, at the right time, expanding this model. We only about 15% of cases which you bring into court do we deal with in this FDAC problem-solving mode. So I could speak, believe you me, all night about FDAC because I'm so passionate about it. But thank you. That's my main message. And please, if you want to come and have a look at what we do, you'd be welcome. But thank you. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Really sort of powerful and positive presentation and video there. And I think anything that can, I guess, reduce the frequency of the huge loss that's experienced by, I guess, parents and children alike by having to separate parents who are considered not good enough at parenting, to bring them up to the good enough parenting level to keep those families together is I think a real achievement. And it's great. The 64% figure is fantastic, but as you mentioned, possibly going forward with more challenges, it might come to 45 to 50%, but still that's great achievement. Just a quick question before I open it up to the floor. What is there sort of a legal definition of prolonged abstinence? How is that defined?
No, there's not a legal definition of prolonged abstinence. It's a judgment call. It's a judgment call as to whether or not a parent has. It's not just about achieving abstinence. It's about looking at this big picture, this jigsaw puzzle. One of the most important pieces in the centre is abstinence. We have to have abstinence and we have to maintain abstinence so that we can fit the other parts of the jigsaw, which together present a good enough parenting model for children to be safe. Generally speaking, you would expect a psychiatrist or a psychologist to say that they would want to see a parent abstinent for 12 months before they could be confident that it could be maintained. Now, of course, one of the problems we have in care proceedings is we don't have, as a starting point, 12 months to play with. Statute says that we have to conclude cases within 26 weeks. However, and we do timetable all FDAC cases to conclude within 26 weeks. We say to parents, we've got this period of time, we call it a trial for change, where we expect you, if you want to have a go at FDAC, they don't have to do it. It's a voluntary process. At the commencement of the proceedings, we have a very detailed initial assessment, and the FDAC team formulate what we call an intervention plan. It's a long list of things which we expect parents to engage in, one of which is abstinence. And we say, okay, you've got 5 months to show us that you can do all these things, including abstinence. And if we get to 5 months and you've done well, we may say, well, we'll extend the proceedings. The judge can extend the 26 weeks time where it's proved to be necessary in order to fairly dispose of the proceedings. So it is common in FDAC. It's actually one of the criticisms of people who don't really get what FDAC is, that it takes longer than standard care proceedings. Yes, it does, if it's working, and so it should, because we won't conclude the proceedings until we're sure, I'm sure, that abstinence can be maintained. So it's common that FDAC proceedings which are working, which will be extended so that we can test further that trial for change. Equally, we might get to 5 months and it's not uncommon to say, no, you might have achieved abstinence, but it's only been for 2 months and you haven't done all the other things that we expect you to. You haven't really immersed yourself into it all. And those proceedings come to an end often within 26 weeks. So I'm sorry, that's a really long-winded way of answering a good question, but I wouldn't want you to think, anyone to think, that this is an easy task for parents just by achieving abstinence for 5 months or so. It isn't. This is a really big ask.
Thanks very much for that response. Any questions from the floor? Councillor Petts?
Thank you. Yeah, my question is about, obviously you need the okay from both parents to do this, where there is two parents. Do you get many failures on one side or the other in terms of people falling off the wagon, as it were?
Great question. Yes. But what's really interesting about this work is it's about understanding families as a unit, and also individuals as individuals, and how the dynamics within the family, within the couple work. So it is incredibly common. In fact, I can't think of a case where we're working or been dealing with both parents or both partners, because sometimes it's a mum with a new partner, where there isn't domestic abuse. Now, think about that. Once you start unpicking that in the context of substance abuse as well, things happen, things change, things develop. In a way which can be very tricky for the team, and indeed it can be unsafe if you think about people living still in that environment and dealing with the trauma that they've had in their lives, which has made them what they are, often leading to substance abuse, often leading to poor relationship choices. So it is not uncommon where we see relationship breakdown during the process, and dealing with that and the fallout of all that can be quite tricky. Equally, some people go through this together with successful outcomes, but really what I'm trying to gently explain is when you start unpicking a picture which is tricky, and particularly with the background of very serious trauma that we're dealing with, added to which there is substance misuse and domestic abuse, and very often mental health issues as well. It's a very dynamic picture that emerges. I hope that's not a wishy-washy way of answering the question.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Can I just ask another one, Lee?
Okay, one more.
Yeah, quick. Okay. What about the effect on the children? How often do the children manage to get their hands on these drugs and take them and are hospitalised? Do we have that sort of data?
Yeah. I've worked in F for nearly 8 years now, because before I set up and Bedfordshire, I opened one in Milton Keynes and Buckinghamshire. I've dealt with lots and lots of cases in FDAC. I have never had a case either in FDAC. Well, no, I have had a case outside FDAC actually, where children have got their hands on drugs. Never had one in FDAC. Not heard of any FDAC judges with that experience. So we don't have that experience. But I should say this, that in the vast majority of cases that we're dealing with, the children would not be placed with the parents at the start of the proceedings. So normally they would be in foster care or another family placement, and not with the parent who's working with FDAC. So that's a very common scenario. And if you think about that, that makes it much safer for the children because they're in a place of safety. But also what it does, and this is the way I explain to parents. So sometimes at the start of proceedings, we'll have a contested hearing and I'll decide whether to remove the children, and often I will, to a safe place. And it gives the parents the time and the space that they need to focus on their recovery. It's very hard to undertake the work that FDAC expect them to do with the children in their care, particularly young children. So, yeah, I would say that the normal cohort of cases that we deal with, children wouldn't be in the parents' care. We work with the parents. We try and get them to engage and change, and then we would gradually rehab the kids or children back home and test that in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wade? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to, I'm very much grateful of HAJ and Beverly to, compile this report, and which shows that, there was, what you have achieved in the matter of 23 months, and is a quite successful pilot project. Of course, parents are the key, are the backbone of the community, of the house, and the livelihood. And if the environment of the house is not good enough, that will have a knock-on effect on the children's growth and their well-being. So I really want to congratulate both of you for this piece of work. My question is, as the pilot scheme runs end of the March 2022. So are you going to run this project again in the near future, or this will be introduced nationally, or because the outcome is quite positive and quite strong. So I just want to know what will be the status
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't stopped. We've rolled on. So with your support and the two other local authorities and the Police and Crime Commissioner, we have, my understanding is, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, ongoing baseline funding. So I hope that means, I'm not a politician, so you'll excuse me. I hope that means that we've persuaded Luton and Central and Bedford that this is a service that we should continue offering, I hope, permanently. And as I said earlier, my vision is that we do more of this sort of work, not less. And so that's why I opened by saying thank you for your support and your ongoing support, and I mean it. And the reason I say passionately that I mean it is, and this is moving on to the second part of your question, which is the national approach. I spend a fair bit of my time helping other leadership judges around the country engage in dialogue with their children's services, their directors of children's services and chief execs, to try and persuade them to open an FDAC in their area. I'm supporting 4 leadership judges around the country doing that at the moment. We've had a really good couple of years nationally with FDAC, where we've seen new FDACs open up around the country, big ones as well. So Birmingham opened 12 months ago, which obviously has the biggest unitary authority in the country. And that's led by an old colleague of mine. She and I set up Milton Keynes FDAC 8 years ago. So as judges move on and spread the word, and indeed, people like DCSs spread the word, the good news word of FDAC, we see new ones springing up. However, everything in the public sector is about money, and value for money, and rightly so, value for money. And so there have been interesting debates over a number of years, really, as to the funding models for FDAC moving forward, because one can immediately see that there are savings to be made here, not just for children's services, but for public health, for crime, where criminality is reduced, for the Ministry of Justice in terms of legal aid. And so it's sort of watch that space in the long term as to how funding models will roll out. But what's important to me is that we've managed to evidence very clearly in our piece of work, evaluated by research in practice, that the money that you have spent on our FDAC has saved you lots of money, far more money than you've actually spent. And so, all I'm interested actually is making Pan Bed's FDAC work, and it does work, and talking about how we adapt the model, change the model, increase, resilience, really, because I am slightly concerned that the resilience. I've got my FDAC workers working at 150%. That can only go on for so long. We do that in a pilot situation to make sure that it works, and it does. But again, I hope that briefly answers your question.
Thank you.
Amanda Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think it's just important that as part of the kind of budget making and decision making process, and the kind of long-term financial planning is still within the kind of corporate and political process for decision making. So there are further meetings that will take place across that partnership to finalise that position for 23, 24 and beyond. So I know that Sally, who's also on the call as our Director of Public Health, along with Ali and myself, and the respective portfolio holders and the corporate leadership team are looking at the points that Judge Prisco made, which is about value, outcomes and priorities within the complex world that we're operating in. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wahid, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I totally support this onwards baseline provision for this service, the AFDAC, and this really works well as achieving positive outcomes for the children and their families. 64% is brilliant, you know, reunification. I know the judge said it might go down to 50, but it's about the 19% before. So brilliant, you know, really happy with this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're all agreed with the recommendation. I certainly don't see any opposing views. So certainly happy to propose that we accept those recommendations. And yeah, absolutely well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item of the agenda. So we'll go to item 7, which is the Work and Behaviour Inclusion Wellbeing Advisory Board update and permanent exclusions. I think for this item, if it's okay with the officer, if we consider the report read, and unless the officer has anything, I guess, significant to add, maybe we progress to comments and questions. So.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give an overview, as you've said, the assumption is colleagues will have read the paper. This paper was brought forward at the request of the committee to update the committee on progress with the Behaviour, Inclusion, Wellbeing Advisory Board programme of work, which started a number of years ago, which shows a real high-functioning collegiate approach across the local area, partners right across crime reduction, education, social care, health, coming together with a view to really improving outcomes for our most vulnerable children and young people, reducing exclusions, keeping more and more children in mainstream schools, and keeping them local, and strengthening the capacity of our local mainstream schools with an inclusion focus as well. So the paper sets out how this framework of activity is impacted in those areas, and the next priorities going forward. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Just one question for me before I go to the chair, to the floor. In paragraph 7 of the report, there's mention of Luton looked after children. Is that children looked after that are in care, or is that children from outside the borough who sort of schooled or something in Luton?
Children looked after who are accommodated in our local schools. So they may well be placed in our local schools by other local areas as well, because some Luton children who are looked after are accommodated in neighbouring local authorities as well. But this is with a focus on children attending local schools where we have the greatest level of influence with our schools, who are part of our collegiate approach to driving down exclusions.
Thank you. I saw somebody raise their hand. Was it Councillor Gershid? Yeah.
Thank you. What I want to understand, once you exclude the child from school, and of course he's going to miss out on the coursework. So, do you put anything in place that whatever they're going to miss out, so that they can be studying while they've been excluded from school, they will be studying at home, or it depends on whether it's a local authority child. It depends which child is being expelled, not expelled, excluded. And also, have you got any statistics that how many children you've been excluded from school in the post-COVID and during this term?
Okay, thank you. Two parts to that question. Yes, we do have data on children who have been excluded from school post-COVID, and there is some information. Paragraph 8 has a table which sets out exclusion trends for the last 5 years, including the exclusions for the academic year to date. Colleagues will be able to see from that table that for the academic year to date, there have been 11 permanent exclusions across local schools, which are 11 too many, but this time last year, we saw 28. And when you look back a couple of years ago, we were looking at 57 for the same period. So there's some real strong impact measures as a result of the framework of activity being put in place under the jurisdiction of local partnerships and partners across crime reduction, education, social care and health coming together at the foundational stages of concern. So hopefully that gives you a feel of the impact of the collegiate approach. With regards to children missing education once they're excluded, the Section 19 legislative framework sets out for education otherwise than at school, according to age, aptitude and ability, the responsibility for local authorities to provide provision according to age, aptitude and ability for reasons of behaviour exclusion and or otherwise. Local authorities have to discharge this duty within 6 working days of a child becoming excluded from school. So that ensures the minimum of drift for a child in terms of missing out on education and provision. So a child who's excluded, the local authority then has a duty to provide provision for that child, and we can discharge those duties in a number of different ways. So it is there in place to minimise the impact of a child missing out on education whilst excluded before they can access provision.
I just want to, for my own clarification, for my own satisfaction, once the child's been excluded, what sort of time scale you gave that in to bring that child back into mainstream school? Thank you.
Thank you. Always depends on context, and there will always be an assessment of need and an assessment of readiness to return. For some children who are permanently excluded from school, it may well be that with a period of rehabilitation, partnership working, we can very quickly accommodate a child back into mainstream school. But it always is based on the child's needs and the child's readiness to return to mainstream school. For some children, it may take a little bit longer. For some children and young people, their needs cannot be met in a mainstream school. They need a smaller school environment. Maybe that be a special school, maybe that be a pupil referral unit or an alternative provision setting where the small group environment, where it's a ratio of 1 member of staff to 1 pupil, or 4 or 5 children to 1 member of staff, as opposed to working in a mainstream environment where it may be about 30 children to a member of staff. So the timeliness of return back into mainstream education really depends on the context, depends on the need, depends on the assessment of the situation as well. So there are a number of factors that come into play. So education in isolation don't make those decisions, but there is a need for a joined up process. So it really does depend on the needs on each and every specific case.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Any comments? No. Good. Thanks, Paul, for that. And yeah, very. You mentioned the table there. Those are very promising figures. It's good to see that quite significant downward trend in permanent exclusion. So it's clear that that's the actions taken are having a positive effect. So members, all in favour, I assume, of the recommendation? Yeah. Great, thank you. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. So we've had 8. So item 9, which is the joint working between Children's Services and Housing, which is in the capable hands of our Service Director for Housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this is a joint report. I'm going to kick off and then I'm going to, Alison can come in and say a few words to add to it. Essentially, this report just brings together a number of things. The first thing being the joint protocol between housing and children's services. We have revised it. There's a little bit of work to be done, but essentially it has been revised. It was initially written in February 2020, so it was a little bit out of date. We've just updated it. Secondly, and that's attached as Appendix 1. Secondly, we had a visit from the Homelessness Advice Support Team, who are an arm of government, who trail around local authorities and tell them what to do. So we've had a couple of visits from them, and the recent visit we had from them, we reviewed the visit before that, and we put together an action plan to deal with some of the gaps that we had in the way that we've been working with children's services. So that is at Appendix something 4, I believe, 3. And essentially, Chair, it's just a report that just says this is what we're going to do. We haven't done a lot of the stuff yet. There are some particular gaps. I mean, just last week I was at a meeting and I discovered that we had 11 care leavers who previously had no status. They've got status now. They were just bidding merrily and they weren't being housed. So you know that those single people are in provision that's probably costing children's services quite a lot of money. I don't know, £800 a week or something like that for each person. So we're reviewing those, and we will put a process in place to deal with those. Also, there probably are around 200 care leavers who are going to need to get housed within the next 3 years, possibly. And one aspect of the action plan talks about reviewing how we manage the care leaver cohort, because at the moment the current system is that we do meet children's services probably 6 months before that young person is ready to live independently, and then we leave it to the bidding system for them to get housed. Sometimes that doesn't work very quickly and very well. So we're reviewing the priority that we give to care leavers, but obviously there's an issue about provision as well, because if you do your sums, or if you're American in math, over 200 single people over 3 years, that's a lot of provision, and that's going to be a challenge for us generally across the piece. So, Chair, I don't want to say anything more. Alison, if you want to say anything, I'll hand over.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. So yeah, I think this is a really good piece of work in terms of progress of relationship, and obviously we're really grateful that Colin's joined Luton, and we've seen a real shift of, you know, in terms of both our working together and the capacity and the challenge. So we have got our resources have increased in the way that we've shared out some of those duties. That you can see that within the report there is an investment of a housing officer, the homeless officer, that links across in terms of our specific duties related to young people, which was an area from our January 20 Ofsted report, that we've seen significant improvement in terms of the way that we respond to young people. But we are also building the conversations, and we can see improved practice related to families that also find themselves unfortunately homeless or who are at risk of homelessness. And we've been working with Colin and his teams to have earlier notification when we potentially can see that families may become homeless, to look at how our new family partnership service can link with those families to try and avoid some of those situations occurring. So, because as you know, that children's services have a duty to provide accommodation for those children and families who become homelessness. So even if the housing duty is discharged, if there are children, then children's services under the 1989 Children Act have to pick that duty up, and that's one that we're conscious that we work with Colin and his service area to promote the best approach to those homeless duties. So it's a huge area of work that I guess Colin and I could probably talk a lot longer and in a lot more detail of, but the protocol, the work that we've done, the challenges that we've gone through, this is really sort of building blocks on relationships and really strong corporate relationships in terms of how we work together to make sure we give the best service to our children and families. So I'm supporting Colin, and I know my officers and Colin's officers are working really well together in this approach. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll open this up for questions. Anyone? No. Just one question to me, and apologies if it's covered in the report and I've missed it, but I'm just curious as to how many children are now sort of homeless children are now housed within the borough, and how many are having to be housed outside.
Chair, if you just talk about normal homelessness, I can say that from the last, at the moment we've got 1,077 households in all forms of temporary accommodation. That was at the end of March. April, it was 1,220. And on average, if there are 2 children per household, we've taken out about 286 children out of temporary accommodation over the last year. We have, last figures, 86 households placed out the borough. That's from housing, and that could be because families are fleeing domestic violence and can't be housed in the borough, or some other reason, gang-related, they can't be housed in the borough. So we don't generally speaking place households or families outside in temporary accommodation if we can help it, but we are housing households into the private sector out of the borough a bit more than we used to, and we have housed probably about 30 households outside the borough as a discharge of our homeless duty into private sector accommodation since the beginning of the financial year. So generally speaking, that's the answer, Chair. I don't know. I don't know what Children's Services, how many houses children they place outside the borough. They will tell you that. But we in housing, we don't have that practice generally speaking, because we know the impact of schools, education, and social services are always telling us to bring people back in anyway because of all those issues. And that it's difficult for us because we've got to find provision somewhere, and sometimes we can't find suitable provision in the borough.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I probably echo Colin's narrative. Actually, I don't have the exact numbers with me tonight, but we have the same challenges. So it may be that those young people who may need to be placed out, so they're in semi-independent units, and that may be it's appropriate for them to be placed out of borough. Equally, we go where the provision is, and so wherever possible, we place in borough. In semi-independent units, usually because it's usually those young people that have come through as homeless at 16 to 17-year-olds. We have a very careful assessment process at that point. When a 16 to 17-year-old comes in, there is a piece of practice called the Southwark Judgment, which informs our practice in terms of whether the young person wants to become looked after. They have the right to come into foster care at that point, and then we would act as their corporate parents. They also have the right to have accommodation without becoming looked after, and we would duly provide accommodation. We also complete a very detailed assessment to understand the level of support that they have. So if they decide that they don't particularly want to come into foster care, but they would rather go into a semi-independent unit, there are different. We've completed a commissioning and a procurement tendering arrangements. We have a very clear framework. Worked on a PAM beds approach where we look at what level of support is required when they are placed in those semi-independent units. So maybe 5 hours is a minimum per week, and they'll have either a social worker or a personal assistant, depending on their age, linked to them through that support. So that support is independent support, and that can go up to, we've got some young people on quite high level of supports depending on their need and abilities, etc. So we have a very wide and varied offer, and it's an assessed offer, and we work with our housing colleagues in terms of how we discharge those duties. And we've got a number of, I guess, thinking about future work. We've got a number of potential sort of projects and ideas with housing about how we can look at how we can progress our offer and how we can widen that out to being a Luton offer in terms of some of the resource being just slightly outside that we would rather use a more local base. But yeah, that gives you sort of a wide. I mean, it may be something you want to drill down on more, but I think also we'll pick it up in the corporate parenting board in terms of specific to those young people who are transitioning from care into leaving care and from leaving care into leaving our services altogether at 25.
Thank you both for that response. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. For a parent, I want to understand that, once the child who wants to leave the care, and if they don't want to take the accommodation which is supposed to be provided by the local authority, so how do you ensure to the safety of that child that if he goes wander around, or so how you keep in touch? Do you take so just I want to understand how you what mechanisms are in place to check on those children. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so if we've got, I'll start with the over 18, so the leaving care team. We have what's called personal advisors, and all of our young people that have been in our care are allocated to a personal advisor. And then we have what's called keeping in touch duties. So even if our young people decide that actually they're done with us and they don't need accommodation, they've moved on, we still keep in touch with them. So, and we manage that in terms of they are adults. So we manage that how, what's the minimum, what's the maximum, and we carry on worrying about them, and we carry on caring about them and supporting them as much as they do want. But as a minimum, we're keeping in touch with them annually. So, and we've got a very high percentage of performance for I think I want to say 100%, Amanda, in terms of keeping in touch for our 18 to 25-year-olds. We're in touch with them all. So our 16-year-olds to 18, so they still may fall into the category of being entitled to support, so leaving care support, and they also are linked to, we start our pathway plans, what's called a pathway plan, which is a leaving care plan at 15 3/4, so they actually then we determine how and what they're going to do, and then we work with them to make sure that their outcomes, their permanency is as safe as it can be. Some of them decide to go home, and we support them to do that in the safest way possible. Some of them, decide to travel. Some of them go on to university. There's all different. There's lots of different pathways that our young people go on. They are allocated a personal advisor, and we track them, support them, help them, and engage with them. So we don't, we don't disengage with our young people. And they sometimes they want a break, and then they'll come back and say, actually, something's changed for me. I need your support now. So, and I need a bit more than what I said I needed last month. So, but on the whole, to be honest, we're really most of our young people, they're really engaged with us, and they take the support and they want to hang on to it. It's very few that decide. The few that we've had over the last couple of years since I've been in Luton, very, very few, and that might be unaccompanied asylum seekers who decide that they've moved on and they don't want to have any further engagement. But we keep on trying.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see Dr. Mohammed has his hand up. Dr. Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. This is very interesting, and I'd like to say that, as we all know, Luton is a super diverse town. Diversity of ethnicities, background, faith, and so on and so forth. I was wondering if we could get an update on to what extent the diversity of the population of Luton is being taken into account when the varying of offer is made, and would there be any perhaps additional consideration required to ensure that the service is benefited from in the appropriate way? So, for example, the last comment that was made regarding the asylum seekers disengaging, that's what I understood. Was there perhaps a reason for this, or was it perhaps down to maybe different, cultural understanding, or so those are really the lines that I'm interested to learn more about in terms of diversity of the population of Luton, to what extent is being taken into account in this offering. Thank you.
Colin?
Let me try to deal with that. When the Ukrainian situation, it's not Ukraine, let me step back. When the Afghanistan situation was happening, and Afghan refugees came over into the country, into Luton, we were engaged across the council about that particular issue. And what we decided as a council was that we were not going to pledge any assistance to those Afghan refugees. Now, the reason why we said we decided that was, at the time, Luton had roughly around 30% of all asylum seekers placed in the borough, compared with the rest of the East region, when we only are 2% of the East region. So based on that, and plus with our homeless situation, our continuing homeless situation and the housing needs issues in the borough, and we're an outlier because we've got quite a lot of homeless households and quite a lot of households in temporary accommodation compared with neighbours, etc., we made a decision that we couldn't deal with the additional housing issues, because we would be looking to house those Afghan refugees into the private sector, where they would be competing with indigenous homeless households. And at the time, lots of private landlords were coming out of the woodwork, offering their properties for ridiculously overinflated prices, when they're not prepared to work with us at the moment, unless we give them guaranteed rents for 3 years. So it was a complex picture, but at that point, so I'm only dealing with this particular issue just to give you some flavour of what was going on at the time. We didn't take that decision lightly, but we had to say to the Home Office, you generally cannot be putting 30% of asylum seekers in the borough when you're not housing any elsewhere. So that was that situation. And at the moment, with the Ukrainian situation happening, Ukrainians are turning up at the airport. At this present time, we are administering the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which only involves us getting the parties together who've already agreed to be matched and have been matched, getting those together. But we've also had to place some Ukrainians in some of our hotels because there isn't a process in place from the Home Office to deal with them. So we're dealing with that situation on a daily basis. So that's just a flavour. But just from a housing point of view, we have to ensure fairness in our housing system and our allocation system. We have to make sure that whoever presents themselves to us, and we've got about 9,000 households on our housing register, it's a points-based or a band-based or a needs-based system. And obviously within that, we have to be conscious that we're not making any decisions that can discriminate against any particular household. So we are very conscious, and frankly, it's an area that is very subject to lots of legal challenge, lots of other challenges, because it's just one of those commodities in life that everybody wants and will do anything to get. And unfortunately, there's lots of fraud in the system, or potential fraud in the system. We've got to be very careful. So fairness, that's the name of the game for us.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, so slightly different, obviously. I mean, we worked really closely with, again, with our housing colleagues and our sort of family partnership service, supported those families and continue, to support in terms of direct work. And obviously, you know the picture with the education department in terms of those youngsters going into schools and being able to have education. So, those decisions, and that's been an important example of how we need to work together to make sure that we're still offering a level of support to families. In relation specifically to our young people who come to us as unaccompanied asylum seekers, just to reassure Scrutiny that my example related to one, possibly two young people who have really left the area and we still continue to reach out to, but have moved into other areas. And as I say, we continue to reach out to them. In terms of we can do a wider report for Scrutiny, or we can do that for Corporate Parenting Board. In terms of the offer for our unaccompanied asylum seekers, we are very supportive and in some ways very generous. And the example that I give to you for that is that currently there is a substantial delay with the Home Office progressing young people who should have had their cases heard. We've written to the Home Office and we've highlighted all of those individuals where their status has been delayed, and we have maintained the funding towards them despite those delays. So we're not leaving our children or young people, they're not children, but they're young adults. We're not leaving them vulnerable. We're acting as good corporate parents, but we are pushing back hard to the Home Office to say this is having a detrimental effect on these young people. And we are very active with our colleagues in the Home Office about how we're expressing the fact that this is impacting on their ability in some cases to gain employment, and we are asking for them to consider an approach that means that they can access employment because the delay is with the Home Office, and some of those are above 18 months or more, where they should have had their status and they should have been through due process. So that's a very active debate that we're having at the moment with the Home Office. We meet with our young people every Thursday. They call it Chill In Club. I've got to make sure I say that right. So it's Chilling Club. A lot of our unaccompanied asylum seekers youngsters go there, and there's a really good network we have. We use interpreters. We're very mindful about the number, and we can give you a breakdown in terms of how our workforce reflects also the young people that we're working with, and how we're conscious about culture, but not just culture and diversity, but also the lived experience of young people and their personal story. So how they want to live and what's important to them and what's their views. So something we're really passionate about, and you can members who are interested in maybe going to a chilling club to meet young people, that we can set that up, let us know, and we can organise for you to pop along on a Thursday evening, and they might cook you dinner, they might not. You'll have to take your chances with that one, or they might expect you to turn up with pizza. But it's if you want to know how things are going and you want to get to know what's really happening, then that's where you need to go. We've also got Children in Care Council with this part of the other agenda item, and we've got different age ranges about how we sort of ensure that young people, we consider their lived experience, not their culture, their diversity, and their language. Really important about how we understand their first language. So really passionate. You press my passionate button on that one, and you're welcome to come and meet with our young people. We can plan that and make that happen for you if you'd like to.